Hi everybody, it's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, The Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my incredible co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin. And today we've got a really good show. We have Randy-Cramer, also known as Captain K. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Randy before we bring him on. But hold on to your hats. He's just really, he's incredible. I've been listening to his YouTubes for a couple days here, and he's blowing my mind. Captain Randy-Cramer is an officer who has been given authority, listen to this, he's been given authority to address the public on behalf of the command staff of the United States Marine Corps Special Section, which was created by President Eisenhower in 1953 as a covert military intelligence branch with special authority over extraterrestrial, multi-dimensional, non-human, and off-world beings, consortiums and collectives, either sanctioned or unsanctioned, within actionable reach of any and all global territory. He is the product of soldier augmentation, a soldier augmentation project called Moon Shadow, a training program for children which he began at age 4, and later spent a 20-year tour of duty off-world, over 17 of which was serving with the Mars Defense Force. He finished his service aboard the EDF SS Nautilus as a pilot under this project called Radiant Guardian, which we're going to have him tell us about. In August of 2013, his superior officers requested he consider going public with their blessing, and he began to share his personal experience with the world in April of 2014. And his website is earthcitizenconsulting.org, and he's got a YouTube channel, and he does public appearances. Let me see what else I have here. Got to scroll down. Okay, then we got a bunch of talking points. I know we're not going to cover it all in one show, and we are going to talk to Randy about having him back. I know we're going to. It's just we're not going to cover it all. Before I bring Randy on, would you, Dr. Lessin, would you like to say something?
Well, this is a chance to get really deep with what's really happening in Mars. I've had extensive in-person interviews with Andy Bashago, and I was able to study his eye movements. And I also interviewed the people that he was on Mars with, and I'm utterly convinced that we've been on Mars and that what you're about to hear about the Mars Defense Force and what's going on there is the real thing. So listen up.
And also, I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more from Randy. Randy, welcome to our show. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're really fortunate that you agreed to come on board the show. Okay, so where would you like to begin? I always like to put the ball back in your court. this is a new audience for you. I'm not sure if there's been other people on Revolution Radio who have interviewed you, but it doesn't matter. We have a specific niche. And could you tell us a little bit more about what was going on with your background so our listeners can better understand what the show's going to be about, especially this Project Moon Shadow and how our government recruits children and all that good stuff. Back to you. Go ahead, Randy.
Oh wow, thanks. Like just right back to me with that one. Okay, sure, I can do that. Well, I'll start with this, because when you say a sentence like, you know, what the government is doing to children, I have to break that apart into the notion that there is no such thing as the government, excuse me, as some kind of overreaching umbrella of authority that controls everything, because that stopped happening a number of decades ago. And when the special study groups essentially started taking control of all the exopolitical reverse engineering technology programs, did we lose them?
Yeah, keep going, Randy. We're going to reconnect.
Okay, no worries. When we started essentially got control of the special study group, started getting control of the programs that had anything to do with extraterrestrial technology, what was supposed to be one organizing governing body, which was the MJ-12 committee, instead of them being solely responsible and accountable and in authority over all of that information, many factions within the special study group started breaking apart and working for themselves. So for decades, there's been no such thing as the government. What we have are parts of the government. What we have are legal, operating, regulated arms of the government, and what we also have are rogue elements of the government who essentially, because when you want to track their paperwork that they sort of use to justify themselves, a lot of it is based on illegality and breaking the law and violating the Constitution in order to justify their existence. So in that sense, they have justified themselves through illegality and therefore are illegal rogue programs. So you have this real problem of what I sort of called my grand cluster fudge theory, because it's a cluster fudge of dozens of different military intelligence organizations just in this country who have been competing for control over the entire mess for decades. So they have this very loose agreement based on some treaties on who cooperates on what they cooperate on and what they don't. And so there's a lot of wiggle room for them to spy on each other, sabotage one another, steal things, technology from one another, and sabotage, each other's agenda. So it's super, super complicated. Let's just start there. So to answer that question even a little more, Phil, I'll say there's a number of different programs that are doing some pretty terrible things. And there are a number of different programs who try and do less terrible things. And there's so many dozens of programs in this country and other countries to sort of train children that all I can really say is that fundamentally we understand you got to start young if you want to really develop and program like a super soldier or a super psionic individual. So you got to start when they're young. You can't wait until they're 17 for them to enlist. You have to start when they're really tiny. So I'm not agreeing with that. I'm just saying that's something we learn as a fact. Like biologically, you want to hit that development stage in order to get those super abilities to happen.
Okay, so we're going to break that down even further. Okay, Sasha has his question first.
What's psionic?
And that's the whole thing that, before you go to psionics, okay, that's part two. Part one was the real government of the planet. So, and we have interviewed other people. We actually had a fellow that was signed a contract when he was 3 years old, part of a program in the UK. So we've been exposed to this personally and as interviewers for the last 10 to 15 years. So we're well aware of this. But let's break this down for our listeners. And just to give you a background on us, Randy, Dr. Lessin and I are Anunnaki researchers, and we're working with other people like the Linkage Institute and other organizations that are trying to figure out which factions are governing and ruling the planet. And so we'd like to get your input on. Let's talk about the government for a little bit here. Who is the government? What are the factions? Can you kind of break that down for us from what you understand is going on?
Well, that's in dispute, isn't it? That's sort of the whole problem is that you have a number of factions who are vying for control at every level, at every position, all across the way, and they're all laying a certain claim, legal claim, in different language, different treaties, different, divine right, or we've been here longer and therefore have a right, or we made you and therefore have a right. And there's a lot of different pretexts that they're making for the justification that they have the authority to decide, for everyone else, or to make control the situation somehow, or have legal authority. So that's completely in dispute. That's why we're in the middle of the grand cluster fudge, because there is no clear decider over who's in charge and what they get to decide. And otherwise we would have a singular global government at this time, if that were the case. We would have a singular oligarchical fascist system controlling the entire planet. The fleet, as we understand it, would be completely involved and supportive of that. And that would be done. That would be finished if that were decided. So the fact that we're in a conflict where there's back and forth, there's sides, there's attack, spy, sabotage, and conflict, and back and forth, means that is absolutely in dispute. And it will not be decided until we sort of end up, one side really sort of gets the upper hand over the other.
What's the cast of characters? Who are the different factions? What extraterrestrial and Earth factions are we dealing with? Can you kind of break it down for us, please?
I wouldn't even try. My understanding is that number keeps growing and growing every month now. So that an EBE manual that used to have 50 or 60 species in it, and then, had 80 or 100, now has hundreds in it, and that just number keeps growing. So what exactly the relationship with these beings and what our sort of trade relationships or understanding is, I couldn't tell you. It's just it's a number that is growing so quickly, so fast, that I'm really I'm not even sure how our own people are keeping track of it all, to be honest. My understanding is that information is coming in so quickly there's no way to even break that down. So, and then a lot of the traditional players aren't who or what they say they are, and a lot of the traditional players aren't necessarily who or what they were 10 or 15 years ago. So I know a lot of people still want to blame the Zeta Greys for everything when they are responsible for nothing these days. We got rid of them. We evicted them from the solar system. They do not exist on planet Earth or within the solar system whatsoever. So anyone who wants to blame them is basically just like, a Puerto Rican did it, blaming a minority or someone that you already want to blame for something in order to waylay actual accountability. But they do not exist in the solar system whatsoever at all anymore. So the landscape is continually changing. There's no way I'd even want to attempt that right now.
Josh, your question.
Well, I'd like to know, Corey Good's been talking about the blue avians, and they're new on the scene. And I mean, who are they? What he said is that they've come to really the entire situation, and they have way higher powers. And I know that you've mentioned them, so I'd like to learn more about them.
I don't know. That sounds like an exaggeration, but we certainly have an experience of them or knowledge of them back in at least to the late 40s and early 50s. They were involved in some of the earliest genetic upgrading sort of genetic superhuman computer programs. I know at least one person who was a product of that program and has a extensive sort of experience with them, but is not someone who they like their day job, so they would not want me to speak their name publicly or any such thing, or would not come out and talk publicly of their story. But we have records of them going way back. So and what we understand is they're mostly been technical, medical sort of assistants in biological genetic engineering programs. That's about all I really know from our record keeping system of them. And most of what I'm hearing about them is sort of brand new information as far as what Corey Good is talking about. And again, I think a lot of species, no matter who they are and what side they are, like to overinflate their abilities or their function. And so anyone who comes along and says, we're the most powerful on the scene now, you better respect us. Like, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But that's usually, like what people say when they come on the scene. They try and command authority. And I don't know, believe it when I see it. But I think that they're helping at the moment. At the moment, that's what I understand to be the case.
So what's your understanding of the Anunnaki and their role in our history and current affairs?
That's an interesting question, and it certainly depends on how you define them. Some people want to define them as sort of being, this one type of Sumerian, lineage or DNA, when the Sumerian royalty lineage may in fact be more than one extraterrestrial species. So I want to say that, people need to be much more clear sometimes about identifying exactly who and what they're talking about. But, my understanding is they certainly are one of the larger state claimers, saying that they have one of the larger stakes and one of the longest historical legal claims on the situation. But again, I think that's yet to be decided and worked out. Do we lose them again? Looks like we did.
Okay, Randy, we're going to connect back with them. If you could just out right now at this.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear any of that.
Is there anything that you find
Hi, we're back. Sorry, we keep getting bumped, so we're going to try our home phone. We're having a storm here in the jungle, so that's probably what's happening. Is also we're talking about this show, so who knows? The powers that be don't want us to hear what's going on. I'm sorry, we missed the last about 5 minutes of what we were saying. So I don't know. I guess we just go to the next. Aloha, you have reached 80824. Hello? Hello?
Hi, is this Janet?
Yes, hi. Sorry, we keep getting bumped for some reason. I don't know what's going on. Do you want to try Skype? John?
Yeah, sure. We can switch over to Skype.
Okay, let's try. We can try, or just do this if you can tie us in. Either way.
Did you want to try the phone line until eventually?
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear. We can't hear the show right now or anything going on. I don't know if we're on or we're just talking to you.
No, we're on live right now. We still have Randy with us.
Okay, so Randy, go ahead and when we're back, know what's going on. So I'm not sure where we left off. Let's go back to talking about how they recruited you into Project Moon Shadow. We're dealing with children. I mean, what did they do? They come knocking on your door and say to you, like on Ender's Game, we want your kid? Or did they sneak in and grab you in the night? How did you get involved with this at 4 years of age?
Well, that's the beginning of a training period. It was actually before that. So they pretty much pick families for their genetics, and they pretty much, experiment and try and sort of sort out the kids and see what they can, genetically engineer to create little super children. So I actually was not recruited so much as designed on a drafting table and genetically engineered in a petri dish before I was even implanted into my mother's womb and born. So yeah, it's a little even weirder that I'm actually genetically engineered from the ground up.
From the ground up. Are you 100% human, or do you have alien DNA within your genetic structure?
Well, we all have extraterrestrial DNA in our genetic structure, so I just certainly have maybe some different specific ones than you or someone else does, but we all do. So I don't even, I'm not sure. I don't know specifically for sure. So, but there's definitely an interesting mix of whatever they put inside of me.
So what are your special abilities? You're like a superhero. What's your special abilities as a genetic? You're human.
Mostly, I'm just supposed to be, generally smarter, faster, stronger, and have better endurance than, everybody else. I suppose I'm a pretty darn good tactical thinker. And the genetic training and the implants and all that other stuff does sort of stack onto some sort of interesting, augmented abilities that are situation responsive. So the switches don't really turn on, unless the threat level increases. So I'll sort of move faster and be stronger depending on how many attackers and how big their guns are.
So when were you born?
1970.
1970, and that was the first time you came in, or I thought I heard something about you were reset. You went through some years and then reset, or was that somebody else?
Well, I mean, the tour of duty is a 20-year tour, but then at the end of the tour, they bring you back to the time that they took you away and, do this sort of age reversing or whatever and put you into a younger body or whatever it is, and then set you to do your life all over again. So you kind of go live 20 years and then come back and do it over down here.
Right, and Al Bailey had a similar thing happen to him, although it might be. So how long have they known how to do this? And who is this? What section of the government is doing this? Who is it? I call it the government, but who are the people that are doing this program with these children? These children.
Well, pretty much any and all of the military intelligence agencies that have super soldier and super spy, psionic spy programs have used children. So whatever their particular and specific method for that program is to identify and acquire them is what they use. And then they train them at a very young age and then deploy them when they're still fairly young, usually 16 or 17 years old. 20-year tour is about standard, and then they do a so-called mind wipe, which it's not a mind wipe so much as a mind repress, and then you kind of forget things, except you're still really emotionally attached to the trauma, and you have to sort of dig through and remember everything, which is kind of a natural process too. So you can't make people forget their memories forever. Like eventually the memories will want to come back. That's kind of how the human mind works. It doesn't want to stay in a state of forgetfulness like that. So it's a ticking clock when you erase again, air quotes, somebody's memories, that they're going to get them back at some point.
Well, Sasha, question.
Well, my questions have been about, I'm really interested in Mars and the history of U.S. defense forces on Mars and in the near solar system, and who have you fought and who have you defended and stuff like that.
Yeah, if you could. I know you don't like to talk a lot about the wars, but maybe just a summary for our audience would be great.
Yeah, sure. No, the Mars Defense Force has probably been active since the mid-1970s or something like that. The first colonies were probably established in the early to mid-1970s, and the Mars Defense Force would have been contracted to defend them probably really quickly. They've been pretty much in operation since then. They've engaged in our territory, we primarily engaged in military conflicts with 2 indigenous species and a draconian invasion fleet that sort of was giving us trouble for a while. And my understanding is some of the other units have sort of dealt with other species on Mars. There's not just, a reptoid species and an insectoid species and us and some other humanoid species or other sort of humanoid species, micro-humanoid species. There's a few different species that have sort of made Mars their home or have been living there for a long time. So it gets a little weird. The specific area where we were at, it was primarily with these insectoid or mantid species and these indigenous reptoids. And then the Draconians, when they started their invasion, which again was a little very complicated to have this kind of 4-way conflict that eventually we kind of started working together, and that's a whole nother story. And they've been pretty much doing that ever since. And I have no idea what the current state of the MDF is other than to defend and protect the colonies. And the EDF, or the fleet, the larger fleet, which is sort of the Radiant Guardian or Solar Warden fleet, is also their job is solar system defense, and they watch everything. And my understanding is there are some other bases in the solar system. I have no idea where they all are. I have no idea if there are any other conflicts that we're engaging with extraterrestrials or other natives in the solar system whatsoever. But it wouldn't surprise me if this was not a singular type of situation, but it was something that was being replicated or duplicated elsewhere as well.
Let me see if I understand that. There's been an accommodation among the species on Mars, and there's no longer an active war. Did I hear you right?
When I left Mars, there was a peace agreement between everyone, and we were not fighting anymore. That is correct. I cannot tell you what the current state is at this time. But when I left, there was an armistice, and we were not in fighting anymore.
Are these technological societies that fought with weapons comparable to yours, or superior or inferior, or how did they fight?
The very differently with very different aspects of what they consider their mastery of technology than ours. And I would say that we were, primarily the underdog in those matchups, that we were not the superior. We got our butts handed to us, more often than not. The insectoids, they preferred to just genetically engineer a whole bunch of other bugs to swarm you and come at you. And so giant swarms of stinging, biting, stabbing insects was sort of their favorite. And the reptoids were amazing hand-to-hand fighters with savage weapons and amazingly psionic. So they preferred up close and were a fair match as well. They were big.
Okay, we're back.
Welcome
Hello?
back. I'm here.
Yeah, what is going on? I've never had this happen before. Okay,
well,
so
let me just say real quickly that about 50% of the time, they do shenanigans and try and interfere with the interviews that I do. So it's really par for the course for me. Sorry.
Okay, well, we're just going to ride with it, and we're just going to keep calling. We have a cell phone, a home phone, and Skype, so hopefully we stay connected one of the three ways. So you're dealing with Ender's Game and all the bugs, and you're getting swarmed, and it's kind of like, several different sci-fi movies we've seen over the years. So that's actually what happened. When did you leave? What year did you depart Mars?
Let's see, that would have been about 19, let's see if it was 17 past 17 years, in 2004-ish, maybe midway through 2004.
Okay, so it's a long time since you were there. And so are you familiar with Randy, what's his name? Corey Good. I'm sorry, Corey Good. And he was talking about there are the 6 space programs. Are you familiar with the different space programs? Or you said you only have your part you know. I don't know. I don't know what you know. Tell me what you know.
I'm familiar with Corey. My brigadier general has certainly said that he is a for real individual, and for the most part is bringing out completely honest and truthful information. But it's not our department to regulate or understand that, and I don't pay too close of attention, to be honest. But he seems cool enough, and go Corey. Good for him to be out there talking to people. Well, I can get more work done that way. So.
Pardon?
I said he can talk to people all day long. I can get more work done that way, and I can talk less, which is great for me.
Well, we have there's a number of whistleblowers, and there's Andrew Bashago, and you're familiar with Andy. I know you did a show with Andy and Alfred.
Andy and I are good friends. I am very well acquainted with him.
Okay, so what would you like to cover? Let's put the ball in your court. What would you like to share with our listeners in this show? We have an hour and a half left.
Well, like I said, your audience better than I do, and the kinds of things that they might be more interested to hear about. Otherwise, I can just talk, shop about things all day long. So,
Randy, can you go ahead and just try to give some talking shop, as you put it. Will we reconnect?
Sure. Well, I know Sasha was trying to ask me about psionics earlier, and since that was sort of just the public speaking thing that I did, which was doing psionic boot camp, I guess we could talk about
Aloha,
psionics.
you have reached 808-244.
So basically, in July, I had a public speaking engagement up at ESETI Ranch in Washington, and my brigadier general suggested maybe we do a little talk on psionics, which is your mind powers. And
Aloha, you have reached 808-244.
So that was a really short talk, a little presentation on the little presentation on the laws of psionics, and then sort of a practical workshop on brainwave mastery. But everyone loved it so much that they wanted me to come back and do a whole weekend. So we tried that. We can. You're there. Lovely. Nice to have you back.
Okay, wait 1 second.
Sure.
I've got a headphone on. Hold on, I gotta unplug it.
You do sound more clear at the moment. That's good.
Honey, I can't see. Hold on. This is hilarious. I think it'll work. There we go. Can you hear us now?
Oh, absolutely.
Good. Sorry, I had a headphone on. Okay, well, let's try this one. We're now on Skype. Plan C. Oh, okay. Well, I want to ask about your body, the bodies that they put you into. I heard you on another interview, and they said you were saying that once you're enlisted, once you're in the program, you're always in the program, and the only way out is death. Can you explain a little bit more about that to our listeners? What you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. No. Certainly, in the case of officers, there's a life contract, which means you're a commissioned officer until the day you die. So I could be 103 and in the old folks' home in my walker, and they just could decide they want me back and just put me, my whole brain, consciousness, mind, spirit, soul, everything into another younger body, and I'd be back to work.
Wow. And so this body, is this?
How many times has that happened to you already?
Yeah, no, it absolutely has. This is definitely not my original, the one that I have now. I honestly couldn't tell you exactly how many I've been through, but I'd say it's probably been at least a dozen, probably at least 10 or 12 that I've been through.
Uh-oh. So how do you, where's you? Do you have a soul? Does the soul get transferred? How do you know?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely know who I am. That's not a problem. Yeah, no, it's the same me, it's the same soul, the same spirit, the same consciousness. They're able to. That's just a something that they can pull out of you, put in a container, and then transfer to any other container. That your body's just a container. So that's kind of science. It's not really just crazy metaphysics that people with machines can't figure out, because they did. And so, yeah, they can just remove everything that you are from your body, put it into another clone body or a different body altogether, or into a box and keep it there for a while and then put you into a body when it's ready. It's just, it's a technology.
Could you be in more than one at the same time?
Not your full soul being or consciousness, no. If they make a clone of you that they want to use for something else, there's a teeny, weeny little sliver of you that they have to put in it for it to be alive, but it's not really very much. They can't really just divide up your soul or your consciousness into different clones. That would be weird.
Yeah, we know that the Anunnaki were able to do the soul transference, and also Whitley Strieber described that happening in one of his books, Majestic. So we know they've had that technology, the extraterrestrials have, and so whoever are the people that are running this planet have had it all along. Speaking of the body, pardon?
I'm saying, yeah, it's old school technology. It's been around for a long time. Yeah, for sure.
Long time. So this body that you're in right now, or the bodies that you have been in, are they your DNA? What kind of bodies are you being put into?
Oh, absolutely. They're just replicas of the original. So yeah, they're just the same replica of the original over and over again. That they genetically engineered the perfect one as far as they're concerned the first time. They just keep, every time I break one, they just make me a new one.
Wow.
Are they all male? Are they all of the same ethnic group?
They are
Same.
all the exact same copy. They're all clones of the original me, no question.
You don't have any choice. You can't say make my this bigger or my that smaller.
Nope. No. Well, in fact, I think from my understanding is that they don't want what they sort of would consider to be sort of a soul or spirit schism. So they would want it to be exactly the same as much as possible, so that your soul and your consciousness would stick to it without resistance.
So basically, we have the ability to be immortal, incarnated into a physical form that resembles our original for eternity, basically, right? If I'm understanding it.
It's I would call it more like cheating death. You know, you're just more like putting it off and putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. You're not necessarily gaining immortality of it. You're just dragging the process out a lot longer.
Wow.
A guy named Supreme David Rockefeller says that he has more than one of these souls that are within him. Have you heard of this before, or witnessed anything that makes you think of one body can hold more than one soul?
Oh yeah, it absolutely can. One container can absolutely hold more than one consciousness or one soul in it. There's no question about that. We had a whole course in officer training school on the cohabitation of human bodies by non-human entities. So yeah, absolutely. And people make agreements for that. People can make agreements to have those beings or consciousnesses come into them and be with them. They can be part of familial agreements, ritual agreements with families or clubs or groups or whatever, or just some agreement that they made, walking down the street or living out in the woods by themselves. And it there are a number of other types of experiences, sort of consciousness experiences or pseudo spiritual crossing over experiences where other beings can kind of come in or hijack. It's like walking out of your car and leaving it there and come back and someone else is in it going, hey, how's it going? And you can't really just get them out. So there's a lot of different ways that could be possible.
And I know you're going to talk about it, I think, how you can protect yourself from the mind control or the energy coming in. It's inappropriate, but I wanted to finish this train of thought before we go into that. So what is going on are you aware of the nature of reality in the cosmos? Have we had galactic and universal wars all along? Is this something that's limited to 3D physicality and it's not happening in higher dimensions and vibratory frequencies? What's your concept of what's going on in the universe and the cosmos and the solar system, etc.?
My understanding is that there's always been far more conflict than there has been order and cooperation, just because of the nature of people from one space who have a need or a want that is contradictory to a need or a want that someone has from somewhere else. And I think some people say that just because you're in a higher dimension that means that you're evolved beyond conflict, and I think that's poppycock. I think that higher dimensional beings have very specific things that they consider to be their job, their duty, their realm of understanding and or protection and or guidance and or creation. And anyone who comes along and tries to push against what they consider sort of their territory or their rights, well, they're not going to necessarily just go, oh, I guess you can come along and mess with the world that I was trying to build. That's cool. No, I mean, that's how conflicts, get started at all levels. And so any notion that everyone's in this sort of orderly cohesion above the third dimension because we're just petty and banal and no one else is, I think belies the true understanding of self-interests that there are, even in higher dimensions where we're caring about one another and we're still like, no, we all have to work together and care for one another. There's still specific interest about, well, this is my job and my understanding, and if you're trying to tell me my job or my understanding, maybe we're going to have a problem. Or if you're messing with my project that I'm trying to fix or help, and maybe we're going to have a problem. So not everybody who comes in to help is really the kind of help you want. And so sometimes you have to go, hey, thanks for helping, but that's not what I was trying to do here. And so anytime there's conflict, just because it doesn't necessarily get resolved with, missiles or tanks, doesn't mean that there isn't conflict or psionic battle or tactical or strategic advantage or planning. I think that happens at many, 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 many levels.
Wow. Sasha, your turn.
What was your social life like on Mars? Did you live in a barracks? Were there married quarters? Were there women in the defense force? What was it like?
We lived in a barracks that we called the Horseshoe because it was shaped like a horseshoe, and it had a barracks for each squad that went around. Each squad was 4 fire teams of 4, so 16 personnel, and those units followed around the outside of the horseshoe. And when we were not training and we were not working and we were not eating and we were not fighting, there was a certain amount of downtime, and some sitting around playing cards, shooting the breeze, interacting socially. And we also had the simulators that were mostly used for training. There was a certain amount of recreational use that was permitted. So other than just going insane, feeling like you're prisoners stuck in a jail that you can never leave, at least some sort of virtual leaving the environment makes you feel like you almost went on a vacation for a few minutes there. So it was sort of tolerable. But essentially that was it. We lived in an underground barracks inside a mountain for over 17 years in one little area called the Horseshoe.
Wow.
And it was probably about 75% male to about 25% female, or maybe 2/3 to 1/3.
I was on Johnson Atoll from 95 to early 97. It was the same ratio, but the 25% women were really busy. Was the same going on in your barracks, or was there some decree that sex was not permitted?
Oh.
And that's not it was only heterosexual sex. But that was only back then. Only heterosexual sex was acknowledged because it was still the military.
Yeah, we had a very, very liberal fraternization policy, and I will just not really go into any more detail than that.
We got it.
We got it. We don't need any more details. I just wondered what people would do on a strange planet. They probably do pretty much what they do here.
Oh, what's the air like?
Let me say this. Let me comment a little bit on that actually, real quick, because there is actually a sort of important subtext to that. When I arrived there, and the commanding officer, who apparently arrived about the same time as I, there was actually a non-fraternization policy in place, and to say the least, it was causing quite a bit of stress and tension. And I would even go so far as, without going, wanting to talk about it, it was even causing some, internal violence. And after he came in and sort of was looking at the numbers, he said, "This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen." And he said, "I'm instituting an open fraternization policy to get everyone to stop, competing about, sort of animal urges." And I would say within about 30 days, like, everyone calmed the frick down. So, there is something to say for, bonobo culture and, just like letting it all hang out, because there is a certain amount of like social cohesion and de-escalation of social violence that comes out of that.
Oh, couldn't agree more. So in your cosmology, or your understanding of the universe, is there a God source, universal consciousness, something at the top of this whole thing?
Everyone has their own theories about where everything comes from, but my understanding is most beings, kind of have their own particular position about where they come from and their planet and their sort of metaphysical view of themselves and their relationship to their planet. And some of them come from, quasi-spiritual backgrounds. But I would really have to suggest that more often than not, the notion of any kind of all-powerful, all-controlling sentient beings at the source or middle of anything is really kind of quaint. So most species understand that the universe is an incredibly complex place, filled with incredibly complex groups of beings of many, many varieties and dimensions, who, depending on where they are and where you are, depends on how things are done, who's in charge, what's the plan, and who your main adversary to that plan or that process is, if any. So we live in a universe that seems to be about as varied in possibility and outcome as you could have, and there does not appear, from anyone that I've ever talked to, I really respect, that there is a central figure which you can hold responsible or blame for any of it. So, and people can talk about central, highest dimension, or the center of the galaxy, or the center of this, or the center of that, or the center of their consciousness, or the center of their creation. But these are all vague philosophical concepts, and there is no tangible scientific evidence that there's any creative, magnified, omnipotent, omniscient source of the universe, or God, or deity, or anything like that. There's a multitude and myriad of possibility, dimension, frequency, life, and intelligence and consciousness to levels that we can barely understand, and they go above levels of that we can't understand, and those beings can barely understand. So what makes us even think that we could possibly understand a unified, omnipotent source, or even if there is such a thing, that we could comprehend that exists? So most of intelligence beings that I've come across think it's a quaint idea to think that there's a God or an omnipotent source to everything.
Mm-hmm. You have a question, Sasha?
Well, it's just, I wonder, the Marines are supposed to be the toughest, and how come they gave you the ability to talk about what's going on behind the scenes when
all this secrecy?
You'd think the Marines were the most tight-lipped, and yet you've been authorized to talk.
Tell us about that, please.
Sure. So when Eisenhower put together with a bunch of senior officers, many of them retired from the Navy and the Marine Corps, and put the United States Marine Corps Special Section, Special Code of Conduct together, it included a number of clauses and articles which were precautionary, so that if a, sort of an if A then B kind of scenarios, so that if certain criteria in what, would be considered to be the public sphere, operational government functionality was questioned or compromised, then United States Marine Corps Special Section officers would be obligated to act in their good conscience to restore legislative, executive, and constitutional authority over programs that line. I've said that in a bunch of interviews.
You're protecting the continuity of the government. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's how it's written into the code. That's what we're trying to do. But again, if it was just so simple as pointing out to everybody, blowing the whistle and going, hey, everybody, you're all breaking the rules. We're here to make this right again. If it was just that simple, then everyone would go, oh, sorry for stepping out of line. No, it's definitely a matter of having to remind people what the law is and bringing them into compliance, and in some cases using an arm lock, and in some cases using a hammer. And so, it's a process. But yeah, that's what Eisenhower wrote into it. So essentially it works out like this, that the national security mandate to protect continuity is greater than any national security mandate to keep a secret. So essentially the legal sort of scales tip in favor of my ability to speak publicly, and essentially also because I have the permission from my command staff to do so. So not only am I legally empowered to do it in the code, but my superiors have also given my blessing. So that's everybody working together on that one.
And then I heard that you were read somewhere that you were being punished somehow by other agents from getting the benefits to which you're entitled. Is that
it's a process. It's a process, and there's paperwork involved, and we filled it out, and there's legal letters and things that have to be done with, and we're kind of on what we call the side door method, which is knowing that you can't just charge up the middle and demand, I demand my records and I demand satisfaction. That will get you nowhere, and that you have to sort of do this quiet side door thing, like filling out the paperwork, asking the right record agencies, and being polite and saying please and thank you a lot, and filling out forms in triplicate and so forth, and then eventually get to be able to see my records and get benefits in the back pay and so forth. And we're discussing FISA court suits and so forth. So it's a process, and the legal system being what it is, things just don't happen overnight. So we're working it, and I don't really care how long it takes. So, it could all be irrelevant by the time that, I'm able to get my records, but that won't be the point. It's just the principle of me getting them at some point. So,
yeah.
So how are you supporting yourself now? Are you working as a plumber or something? I mean, they're denying you your retirement, so to speak, right?
Mostly off of the kindness and generosity of others. So
oh my goodness.
If it were not for a bunch of wonderful people who have been really beautiful to donate to the cause and to further the cause of exopolitical awareness, I would not be able to stand here and talk to you at the moment. I would probably be doing plumbing or something. Now I know people bring this up a lot, and there is this very interesting issue between why my own superiors can't solve that problem, and it has very weird things to do with what they are legally empowered to do right this very second, as far as my case is concerned, and what sort of things they are not legally empowered to do, as far as they've been the ones who sort of said, well, you're going to need to ask this person for this form, and you're going to need to file it with this department. So in the sense that they have, supplied legal counsel, they have. So they have absolutely helped in the sense of, like, here's how you go about this, here's what you're going to need to do. But, their ability to, because it's not, and then this has become so bureaucratic, right? It's not their department. They can't just cut me a check and say it's solved. It's like this whole other department to sort of sort this out. But they have provided this absolute huge mountain of intelligence and other support, and granting me access to psionic specialists within the Corps and within the command, and giving me access to a team of intelligence officers to ask them questions and get information for them on a regular basis. So while they have not been able to just, drop a supply crate, with a check in it, or add zeros to my bank account or something, they have absolutely provided every single thing that they could other than that in this process. So, and my brigadier general and I have continued to have these conversations about, how this works out, how we're kind of at this strange little bottleneck of time and space where this will not be the case for much farther down the road. We have, plans to sort this out and so forth, and are talking to people who are also very serious about possibly funding research and development projects and so forth. So it's not that I'm just like a boat dead in the water with no wind in my sails. It's just a matter of this is an odd little period and phase in the project when there's not nearly the kind of personal resources that make everything as easy and simple as we would like it to be. But they're wonderful, beautiful people who have made that possible and given much of themselves to make that happen. So we're going to get to a place where that will be solved in the near future soon enough. So I'm not worried about it. And they provided a ton of other support to sort of help me, solve all of that and eventually get to my records and benefits and so forth.
Looking at it from a distance, it almost seems like you're a trial balloon or an attempt at let's see if we have this guy disclose what kind of flack he draws. Just like when you want to ambush the enemy and you send a point man out to see if he can draw enemy fire, then you flank him, and I somehow get that picture of you that you're being out there drawing the fire to see what happens. Do you ever get that feeling?
Oh, absolutely. No, there was a conversation that my brigadier general and I had at some point where I essentially was seeing that and saying, so just to be clear, you also want me to do this to be bait? And he said, oh yeah, you're bait. Yeah. I was like, okay, cool. I can deal with that as long as we're honest about that. So, yeah.
Oh. Well, I know two retired quote unquote super soldiers, and they're in their 60s now, and they both have all their benefits and full retirement. So after the show, I'll give my friend a call and see how she got the both of them through the red tape. So
please do, yeah.
Yeah, you definitely deserve it. You have
if you've been all these lifetimes, you've amassed a fortune in credit somewhere that is a vast fortune by now. If you could collect it all,
you would think.
I did some like rudimentary math on just like how many years of back pay they owe me, and it's a nice little chunk. Yeah, it's not small change if I get every dime that they owe me. That's for sure.
That would be great if you could. Okay, we've got 1 minute for the top of the hour. Where would you like to go the second hour? What are some of the things you want to cover?
Oh, boy, you keep putting me on the spot, asking me to direct everything. So, we can talk about anything you want. Sasha was earlier wanted to talk about psionics. We just did the psionics seminar. We could talk about that. Whatever you want.
Okay, we will come when we'll do psionics.
Yes.
And I want to talk about Stuart Swerdlow was told about the nature of the cosmos and all the beings and who came first, like the creation story of the universe. Did they tell you a great creation story of the universe, like what species came first, that type of thing? And we'll continue. Okay. Okay. We'll be on commercial break for about 3 minutes. I'll be right back. Aloha, everyone, and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I am Janet Lessin with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin, and our special guest, Randy-Cramer, also known as Captain K. Before we get back to our show, I just want to remind everyone that Revolution Radio is listener-supported, so please do go over now to the website button on freedomslips.com, that little button there, and make your donation. $1, $5, $15, $20, whatever you can donate is greatly appreciated, and we do thank you very much for your donation, because it allows Revolution Radio to bring you shows like ours and the others with all the wonderful guests and hosts we have on the Studio A and Studio B on freedomslips.com. So we are coming back to our show. Sasha, what would you like to say before we...
Well, we're going to move on and understand how psionics work and just what that means and what the implications are for our society.
Randy, what is psionics? What are we talking about?
That's your mind powers. You know what your mind powers are, right? Well, them's your mind powers. That's psionics. So essentially...
No, not psychic. What is the difference?
That's a dirty word. Don't ever say that word in my presence again. Psychics are people who charge $5, $20 to read your palm, and you're always going to find and get a new job, meet someone, and go on a trip every time. So the science and the physics, the laws of physics that govern, thought projected into energy is called psionics. And so in the covert military intelligence world, we not only have a vague understanding of that, we have broken them down into laws like of physics called the laws of psionics, and I pretty much have just been teaching sort of the first 5 laws, because the next 5, the 6 through 10, get really calculus-y, and my calculus isn't so good. Most people struggle enough just trying to get through sort of the first 5. But I also make a distinction between talking about psionics in a lab versus psionics in a field, which is, when you're actually trying to demonstrate that the laws work and how psionics work in a laboratory. You have a Faraday cage and you have all this sort of very delicate instrumentation, and it's a little bit of a different process. And when you're doing psionics in a field, which is just sort of exercising your mental abilities in any other situation, that's more about brainwave mastery and sort of practical living in your now of your your mental powers and your mind-body connection, etc. So we spend a bit of time talking about the lefty brainy rules of how it all works and how brainwaves work and how brainwave mastery works and how sort of balanced hemispheric states, awakened mind states, creative mind states work. And then we spend some time doing it, demonstrating how we get there and how you connect your mind and your body together, and essentially break down what we understand in the military to be the way we understand the mind-body connection and your psionic abilities, and distilled from every other bit of knowledge that we've ever come across on this planet or within to any other, into essentially a basic manual that, because of what we understand in the civilian world, I can translate into sort of an information about, okay, here's what I can tell you about the laws of psionics, which you probably never heard before, and here we can talk about what we want to do as sort of of demonstrating this by being able to do sort of laboratory research at some point and write up a physics paper on it and everything, and not just say, oh, this exists somewhere else, but at some point the plan is to get an actual psionics laboratory and build all of this equipment and all of this psiometer and everything that we need to demonstrate that these laws work, and actually publish a peer-reviewed paper and let other scientists disprove or disprove as they like. So but essentially when we do the seminar, we want to get the left brain nodding along about what's science about this, and then the right brain nodding along about what's experiential about it, and then you have a whole-minded experience, which is how you maximize psionic development, psionic potential. And why do we want to do that? Because we are a psionically emergent species, and we want to go from being psionically emergent to being psionic, because that's a real evolution that our neighbors in the galaxy can respect. And it will also be an evolution that we can get beyond a lot of our own petty bickering and so forth. Because if we live in a world where no one can lie to anybody ever again, like that's a total game changer in how civilization operates at every level. So we want to do that. We want to get there.
Oh, I can get behind that. Transparent, authentic world where we're not lying. Imagine that.
But imagine playing baseball. There was supposed to be an American Indian who could throw a football, and if an interceptor was coming between his receiver, he could make it jump up in the air and go to his receiver. And I guess that's one of the things that for a Marine, it would be fantastic to be able to influence battle with your mind.
Is that what we're talking about?
Well, there's a whole slew of sort of what opens up when you start talking about your mental abilities. And so what you start to be able to change in your ability to perceive time, space, for starters, not to mention what then become your ability to understand matter and energy and your ability to influence it through your mind, and mind over matter is sort of a classic way of describing it. And as well as taking it to another level and how to use it actually offensively or as in a form of attack to actually possibly injure or kill someone. So there's a whole range of what you can do with it and what you learn to do with it and how you sort of achieve mastery of your psionic abilities.
Give us some examples of some benefits of mastering these psionic abilities personally and as a society globally.
Self-healing and interpersonal communication, the ability to psionically or telepathically communicate with people, to be able to, again, know when someone's lying to you and when they're telling the truth, and the ability to talk to your body and tell it what to do, which is how you essentially, dictate self-healing. Body, do this, fix that. I said so. Now do it. That's really what you do.
Have you applied it to any sports? Have you actually played baseball using your mind that way?
No, I used to be a runner, and so I certainly tried to apply my ability to make myself run better. But, there was also a part of the program that wasn't going to let me fully maximize my abilities on the track, because that would, let everybody know what was going. That would, raise eyebrows. So somewhere there's a placard when I was running track of all of my ribbons that I got, and I got a lot of second place ribbons. A lot. So in many cases it was just like, nah, we're not going to let you win all the time. That's going to make people look at you too closely, but we'll let you get second a whole bunch. So I got a lot of red ribbons. A lot of red ribbons.
Well, that's good. At least you got the red ribbons. Well, tell us more about the healing, because I was just talking today to a friend and about, his wife's all concerned. He's on all these medicines, it's not working. And I just said to him, it's in yourself. You've got to, decide yourself to heal. So I don't know if it's close to what you're talking about, but I got it on my metaphysical, spiritual, woo-woo concept. Tell us about the healing that can happen with psionics.
Yeah, absolutely. What we understand is one of the main principles of self-mastery is the mind-body connection. Understanding that your brain isn't just this isolated thing inside your skull that exists independently of your body, that your cellular memory, your endocrine system, the energy that travels through your consciousness centers and your chakras is all part of your mind-body experience. And the only way to develop yourself is to become aware consciously of that experience. So when you become aware of the mind-body experience, you eventually become aware of the fact that you're not just telling your body what to do on a superficial level, like when you reach to grab a cup and take a drink from it, that you're actually telling your body what to do on a many other levels, so you can tell your body at a cellular level, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. So you can really, when you start to understand the parts of your body and how they work, you can start to tell it what to do.
Tell us more. I definitely want to tell.
I mean, that's the basic part of it. I mean, you just tell your body what to do. You know, fix that, heal that, don't let that grow there. You know, fight that cancer, kill that thing, make that go away, heal that nerve damage. I mean, you can basically just like continue to give your body instructions on what it's supposed to do, and it'll just eventually follow the instructions. Your body is a thing that it does basically whatever you tell it to do. You just sometimes have to get it used to it complying to your commands if it's not used to that, you know. So you may have to develop this if you don't already have one, you may have to develop a relationship with your body where you can go, hey body, do what I say. Because at first your body might go like, screw you, I don't want to do what you say. And you go through this whole conflict about, you know, no body, do what I want you to do. And your body goes, no, I want to sit here and eat Twinkies. And that's just what you end up doing, because you're not, you know, your body is deciding to tell you what to do instead of you telling your body what to do. So, you know, you have to develop that relationship with your body where you tell your body what to do and that it agrees with you eventually and it does what you say. So that can take a little time, but once you have that relationship, then it's just about understanding that you have dominion over your body. It's like a universal law, and so you just get to tell it stuff, and if your body doesn't comply, you have to go, hey body, I'm reminding you, like, it's the law, you got to do what I say. And you know, when your mind is focused enough on that just happens and needs to happen and will happen and is, you know, the right and law to happen, it will.
So are we aging because we believe it and we're not telling our body to knock it off and quit getting old?
You know, there's an aspect of that, but we've also had our genetics tampered with to keep us from, you know, from living much longer. We also live in an environment that's so heavily oxidized, and we so don't have any of the good things going into our bodies that would normally keep us alive for centuries. So we're on this variety of ways in which we shorten our lifespan program on this planet at the moment.
So who was the one that implemented that program to shorten humanity's life expectancy from your perspective?
Oh, my understanding that's happened a number of times, you know, since we go way back. So I couldn't tell you when the first time that happened was or who did that the first time, but it's happened more than once by more than one culprit.
All right, so we're being purposely shortened, and that's one of the things that I talked to Dr. Aubrey de Grey, and they're doing the Human Genome Project, and so they've discovered, or they're working on, or they're very close to coming forth with technologies that will allow us to live to be 1,000.
Oh yeah, easy. Yeah.
Yeah. So are we at least going to get a longer life expectancy? It's like, you know, most of us get less than 100 years. It's like you're just basically growing up and becoming aware of life, and then it's over before you really get to enjoy it. And, you know, it takes a long time to get wise.
Yeah, no, I think it's typical for beings who live, you know, between sort of 800, 1,000, 1,500 years, no matter how you sort of want to calculate that, which is kind of about what our normal lifespan, I think, is supposed to be. That, yeah, your first 100 years is really like adolescence and growing up, and you don't really even get till adulthood until you're like 100. So we're absolutely shortchanged and not being allowed to grow up to be real adults. Because I guarantee you, if we lived in a planet where everyone lived to be 400 years old, we would all have a very vested long-term concern in how our environment worked, how our economy worked, how our society worked. There would be a very vested interest in everybody to make sure that everything functioned long-term, because we'd all be here long-term, instead of just having this very, oh well, I'm a victim to my society because I'm only here for this short time and I can't do anything about it. When if we lived here for hundreds of years, we would all be very concerned about how things were going, and we would all be making sure that the world was run better, because we would have a vested interest in, you know, being here in the next 400 years and how it was going to go.
So that's the point, and it would be great if we could do this. Is there anything happening that you're aware of that we're going to change the structure, which obviously isn't working? And there's all this talks about the whole society breaking down, about the economic systems, you know, falling apart. what do you know from your inside track, so to speak, where we're going to, or do you?
Well, again, there's conflict. So, I know that we're doing a lot of things to bring people into compliance for a number of different legal and treaty reasons, so that a lot of these rogue elements and people who are committing massive war crimes and human rights violations are brought to, that is brought to an end at some point. And for those who are resisting that process, there is some, like I said, strong arming and some, vaporizing them out of the sky and so forth. So that's going to get worked out when one side has the upper hand over the other, and the other, complies, or they get, every last one of them is put to death. So depending on just how far they want to drag it out. Or I know that as far as myself and the people who are on our side of it are concerned, we're going to fight this to the very last man and to our very last breath, because we understand that that's what's at stake here. So if that's their plan, then I guess we'll fight them to the very last man, and we'll see where that goes. But my understanding is we have a lot of things in play, that we should be seeing affecting the world and steering us into that more positive and more truthful direction, which we just did. I know no one's really, super happy about this, but admitting that there's running water on Mars is a whole nother step in a whole nother direction beyond where they were the week before. And so it's a lot about reading, you read the whole press release that NASA put out, and many of the sentences that were squeezed in there are really the big news, which is saying, well, not only do we think that there's running water, but that might mean that every notion, that they've had that it's a non-breathable habitat that can't support life could be totally false, and it might be able to have a habitat that can support life right this very minute. So they're leaving a huge door open for themselves to come to a whole bunch of other information, a bunch of other conclusions in a pretty short period of time if they want to. And they've done way more than just admit that there's, trickling running water, which is kind of what they said, but at the same time, in that same breath, in the same release, admitted several other sort of much larger possibilities about their changing attitudes about Mars. Like, everything we've known about Mars up until this point has to be rethought. It's no longer this dry, arid place that, can't support life. We have to look at it as a completely different organism now. And essentially want to put more dollars behind NASA exploration to get there, which sort of puts these, Elon Musk failures in kind of a different light, which may be that, his rockets blew up because we eventually wanted to say, we gave private industry a try. They suck. We need NASA to build rockets to get to, or spaceships to get us to Mars, and so that we can go back to having an actual NASA program instead of a private program, which I'm going to state really clearly. I don't think we should have, we should just contract out space-based industry to private industry. I think we still have to have a spinal column that is a government NASA-based program. I just firmly believe that that's the only way that it will really function. But I think it still needs to be, needs to be fixed and reformed on all kinds of levels. But they've moved the can down the road in a way that is huge and cannot be understated. And that's, something that's definitely moving us closer to disclosure and understanding what's going on. So it's happening.
So
we're getting there.
Did you see any lakes? Did you see any rivers? Was there marijuana growing on Mars? I think, what were there animals that you saw? What was the air like? And different. What are the different zones of habitation? What is there?
I've got satellite pictures that show forests. We certainly saw, small trees and shrubs and, small birds and small mammals, ground diggers, little lizards in the ground. It was cold, thin air. We were up very, very far north. And there was certainly, streams and creeks and so forth that would trickle and run off in the spring. And sometimes even during the wintertime, they still had water in them. But it was really, really cold where we were. So I imagine the farther towards the middle you got, the more temperate it was, and the more likely that you would have standing or liquid water all year round. So it definitely was there, though. I wouldn't say I saw anything that would qualify as a lake. I would say that I've seen things that qualify as ponds, as a good-sized pond, with shrubs and trees and critters that live around it and so forth.
So you were limited to one area.
Wait, do critters live in the water?
There were certainly critters living in the ground, in the shrubs. Birds and things living in the water. Sure.
So you were limited to one area. You weren't allowed to travel around Mars.
No, I mean we certainly covered a certain, zones, quadrants that we were responsible for, and that was really it.
That was it. Okay, go ahead. Your question, Tosh.
Did you grow marijuana on Mars?
No, I certainly didn't.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I saw you did an interview on where is that? Mars and Cannabis, the extraterrestrial plant. And I didn't get a chance to listen to that. Can you tell us a little bit about what that show was like, what freedom of choice, or what are your concepts or perspectives on that?
Oh, yeah, Joyce is fun. Basically, that we understand historically that cannabis that Shiva brought it down from the mountain as a healing plant to give to the people, and so yeah, I mean, cannabis is space medicine. I mean, all the old gods are spacemen from other planets, and so if Shiva's really just a spaceman from another planet who brought cannabis down to people for healing medicine, then cannabis is space medicine, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Cool. That's sort of how I figure it, right? It's just kind of a logic puzzle.
So, what are some of the? I guess that's a different thing. I was going to talk about.
Cures cancer. We know that. I mean, for everyone who doesn't know that already, I mean, we know that cannabis cures cancer, just absolute cures it. So we have a cure for cancer, and it's cannabis. For anyone who doesn't know that.
Okay, great. Okay, Sasha, you have a question? No. Okay, I'm going to look at my question list here. All righty. So, let's see. What are the new technologies that are forthcoming? I mean, there's all these wonderful things. I heard you talking about, you lost a limb. Tell our listeners about that. You can lose a limb, or did somebody get decapitated? I got confused.
Yeah, I mean, that happened to us a lot.
Yeah, you got decapitated?
Yeah, probably about a dozen times or so, I'd say.
Well, what's that like? Do you really start? Can you really continue to think after your head's off your body?
Yeah, depending really on how many seconds it takes for your brain to lose blood pressure. So is the amount of time that you have consciousness before you black out. So it kind of depends. And so if you're if your head pops off your shoulder and it's spinning, centrifugal force can actually keep blood sort of in your brain for a few seconds longer than if it just pops off your head and, drains out the bottom of your neck. I know that may sound morbid to people, but having my head blown off a few times, I've sort of, thought about it. And there were certainly times when, it popped up in the air and it seemed to take much longer to sort of go, to black out. But you just kind of black out, and then they stitch you back together, put your head on another clone body or whatever they do, and then you wake up in the bed again and go, oh, what's going on here? But essentially, if it's not that severe, if you just have a hand or a leg or an arm that's been damaged or an organ that's been damaged, they essentially can put you in this holographic regenerating medical bed, which projects a hologram onto your body that has resolution at the cellular level, so that basically if your arm is blown off at your elbow, your cells get to that open air and go, oh, we can't grow anymore. But if you project a hologram over that convinces your cells in your arm that it continues to go down where it isn't, it will just keep growing, and sort of dominant harmonic frequency resonance also sort of starts to take place, and your limb will just continue to grow and grow and grow until it fills all in of that space, all the way down to your fingertips. So they can certainly accelerate the process. So any technology that we come up with as what we call sort of an entry level of that will be very slow to sort of grow back limbs and so forth, but we will have it because we certainly have holographic generators, and we have the software that builds a virtual person from their DNA. So we just have to increase the resolution of both of those things down to the cellular level, and then we'll be able to duplicate that here on Earth as a civilian technology. We're pretty excited about that.
So when your head was blown off, so you're saying you didn't die, your soul didn't go down the tunnel and meet your guides and your ancestors and et cetera, et cetera. That didn't happen to you? Or?
No tunnel, but sometimes there's sort of a trans-dimensional experience of crossing over and having a conversation with guides and then coming back. That happened a bunch, yeah.
Okay, so your head was blown off. How long can they keep your head off before you permanently stay on the other side with your guides and everybody, your family?
It's fair. Time, passes really differently when that's happening, and essentially, as long as there's a certain amount of electrical activity in the brain that they can kind of hold on to, your cord, still connects to your body, and if your head comes off. They actually can put you in a big old refrigerator. They have a shelf in there, and it sort of has its own stasis chamber, which basically keeps you. It essentially slows time down around you, so you die more slowly. So they can have more time to get you back and stabilize you, sort of in the medical unit. And there's different levels of being sort of really almost or sort of kind of dead, and if they can bring you back, you're retrievable, and if they can't bring you back, then you were unretrievable, and that's really unretrievable is really totally actually dead. Anything less than that is not kind of sort of mostly pretty dead. We're not really sure if we're going to get them back, kind of dead, but then you're either retrievable or unretrievable.
Wow. Well, I heard stories that they retrieved the body from the moon, and they said that body wasn't quite dead, so it's that state, I guess, it's still retrievable. And then they found a bunch of ancient corpses or whatever, and they seem to be in some kind of stasis, and they said that they're not quite dead. So now that makes sense with what you're saying. So you never went to the unretrievable part, and I'm glad you're here. But what I wanted to know is, when can we get this stuff? Are they gonna? I mean, you think they could offer this to people and make billions and trillions of dollars if dollars is what your life is about? And are they going to ever offer this technology to, the public as something you can purchase?
Or does the Queen already have it?
Yes.
Didn't you see that movie with Matt Damon in it called Elysium, which is all about the medical bed technology and how the elite people want to keep it from all the poor people who they want to just get sick and die? Didn't you see that movie? Because that's exactly what it's all about. It's a bunch of people up at the top who say, fuck you, we're going to do what we want, and we're going to keep this technology to ourselves and live for hundreds of years, and you all can get, cholera and the flu and broken bones and die.
Right. So we're for the reality where they let this out, and I'm not sure how we can bring that about. Is this a political thing? Do we have to? I mean, is there? Yeah,
no,
anyway,
like I said, we're working on it. We're working. Like I know how this technology works. I have people who are working the R&D right now, and we have more money to sort of make it happen. We will have a working, functional model over time. So it's going to happen eventually. We'll get there.
Well, it would be nice for you to connect with Dr. Aubrey de Grey and the SENS Foundation, because they would really love to have your information. And I think that team is the cutting edge, the Methuselah Foundation, and we might, you might accelerate their processes, and they're kind of converging on the same. They'd love to have your piece of the puzzle. That's all I'm just saying. After the show, I'll connect you if you want to talk to them. Because
I can consult on any number of projects. So, sure.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So what about this false flag alien invasion scenario? I'm sure you've heard about it. Is there such a thing being planned? Are we ever going to get, quote unquote, disclosure?
Oh yeah, we'll get there eventually. Well, it's disclosure's an inevitability. It's just a matter of the whens and wherefores. And I think that as much as some people might like to think that we're past the point of a hoax invasion, I don't know. I think that there's still a lot of divisiveness that could be unified with a common enemy. And so I think that there are a lot of people who agree with that, and that there's still likely to be a hoax sort of invasion or hoax hostile species that we have to deal with in order for us to be all unified against one singular bad guy that we can all agree upon. But who knows exactly when that's all going to happen? I mean, we just don't know. Even the people who think that they know don't know, and won't know until probably the day before or something like that. And it's because there are people who are dragging their heels and people who are trying to make it happen. And so we'll know. I basically hate to say this, but we'll know when we know. But we do know this, that we have been steadily getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. So while I can't pick a date, I would still govern to say, we're really close to a larger disclosure moment, but who knows how long they're really going to drag their feet out. We'll see.
Is there a Star Trekian type of federation of planets that that's out there, and if you're aware of it, or
Which
I keep hoping it's some kind of alliance of the good guys.
Which one?
Because I'd like to. Well,
there are many is the answer to that question. There are many. So, there's more than one. There's not just one group, and there's many, and they all have a slightly different idea about what's good, what's just, what's right, what's wrong, and what they can and cannot do or should and should not do. And it's complicated. You think geopolitics on planet Earth is complicated. You just get thousands of civilizations and species trying to sort it out. It's really even more complicated.
Well, how do we up-level the Earth from a level 0 civilization to at least a level 1? That's my question, because it seems we're pretty primitive right now in comparison to where we can go. I mean, I'm an experiencer, and I've interacted with many different species, and I've been sorting it out because, of course, they don't give you conscious memory all the time, and I have to recover some things, and I remember some things. But to me, it seems like I've really been engaging with some high-level civilizations that are it feels really good and wonderful and beautiful. I just want to overlay that reality into this one because I'm 61 and a half and my husband's 75. So our clock is ticking. And my desires in this lifetime is to see this happen because I grew up with Star Trek. I hung out with Gene Roddenberry and Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov and J. Allen Hynek in my early years in the 60s and 70s. And that was the dream of that generation is coming to where you're talking about, or at least the peaceful part of it. And so what are your thoughts on that? How can we get there?
The simple answer there is the same way that civilization has always progressed, which is one technology and socioeconomic improvement at a time. And we certainly have a lot of areas in our life and in our world where technological and socioeconomic improvements can be made. And as when there's less of the back and forth struggle and someone actually has an upper hand, then we'll see the world actually sort of start to politically take a shape that is more rational and more progressive, because there will simply be less resistance to that. But as long as there's, this very, very powerful, oligarchical, corporatist, got their claws in the whole thing, it's going to take some undoing. But it's a complicated outcome between different extraterrestrial consortiums and human beings who are sort of cooperating with them for different ends. So we're getting there. It's just going to still take a little while before we get there, and we're just going to have to change everything one at a time. We change the medical system by changing medical technology. We change transportation and energy by changing those technologies. We politics has the ability to change as we change the technologies and we change our understanding of what economic need is, and we understand what it means to participate in civilization, and understand that as we live in a world that is as larger and larger quantities of wealth, the easier it becomes to just do the math and go, we spent this many trillions of dollars this year on killing each other. This many hundreds of millions of dollars would have ended poverty. Maybe we should end poverty. And so we really have choices where we can absolutely shift dollars and end poverty, and poverty just would end altogether. And ending poverty is a way in which we go from a zero to a one, by not continuing to treat our own humans, brothers and sisters, as other cattle which we're supposed to feed off of or think of as resources in this sort of hyper-competitive, claw everybody on top of one another and, eat, someone who's not your own kind of philosophy. That's not growing up. And then when we grow up to sort of recognize that a civilization that functions for everybody is a civilization that can be respected by our intergalactic brothers and sisters, then we'll get there. So I think that we're at a point where we could make those turning points really quickly, and it's not going to take more than, 5 or 10 years to see massive changes in what we understand currently as our technological growth and development in areas like green energy and medical technology, which shift financial and social burdens on things that we're doing right now. So essentially, you get rid of the need for pharmacology as a way of treating illness and a way of keeping people dependent, and the pharmaceutical industry has become very parasitic on the system, and you essentially can eliminate that by creating something that's cheaper and easier and better. And so the holographic medical bed technology, as we understand it, would be able to eliminate pharmacology, because it would simply be cheaper and easier and have less side effects to fix everything, not treat, but cure and fix any and all ailments, including growing back limbs, restoring damaged organs, restoring sight and blindness, deafness, curing anything and everything that you could think of, because you can project the perfect genetic cellular version of that onto that body and make it whole again. It just becomes that simple. So there are ways to replace all of this. It's just going to take some time. It's going to take the will, and it's going to take winning a few more battles before we actually get a social-political system that's more favorable to the populace and less favorable to a billionaire class.
Right, and that's the key. Is right now we have a system that's top down and it's all based on the billionaire class. It's a good way of putting it. And there's the power elite, and they control all this technology and the information. And so it doesn't seem like we're ever going to get it. But we're talking about it now, so it is coming out in that way. I'm just not sure how that gets, fine-tuned and turned over into what you're talking about, a world where this is all out there. And, of course, it redesigns the total economics of the planet. And we need to have a needs-based economy where the needs of everyone born. I know Alex Collier talks about this. He says that in space, the extraterrestrials that he's communicating with, they do not have money, or they have another system. And he said, how can you create a planet where people are born and you don't even meet their basic needs? You charge them to live here. And that's what we have going on here. So I want to see that change tomorrow. Let's make this happen. Sasha, you have a comment or question? No,
not right now.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more about the new technologies that are forthcoming.
Well, like I said, I mean, we're definitely seeing a number of venues across the board for generators that work on water, and there's a couple of different people that have sort of developed this hydrogen cracking technology that can crack the hydrogen right out of water, and we just have to sort of see this sort of continued sharing of this information and development. There's a lot of people who are spreading sort of electron pump and free energy technology on the internet, and people are making it. People are duplicating those experiments and making it. There's a bazillion YouTube videos on how to and what these things sort of look like. So they're out there, they're floating around. We're just still getting to the phases where how we put these things into the general sphere. But how about a company like Tesla Motors, which is basically releasing a battery now that you can charge up on your wind and your solar, and it will store, which we haven't been able to do before, is store the massive quantities of electricity that can be generated that way and use them later. And now they're like, nah, we got a battery for that. It's cool. Charge it up, use it later. And that's huge. That could get people off the grid and off the dependency of coal, which, it's 17th century technology. It's kind of time to do away with.
Well, you look at our whole technology we have, everything's boxes that fly around on fossil fuels, and they're dangerous. They crash, they fall to the earth, they blow up, they wreck, and people die. So Aubrey de Grey once again said 100,000 people a day die that wouldn't have to if we had all the technologies. And so that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm going down our list of questions. You had a very curious one for me. You said, discuss Kim Jong-un, who's more of a big deal than anyone thinks, and because he's colorful to talk about. I'll give you some time to discuss Kim.
Lil Un is quite a character on the international stage, and he is someone who has what I would consider one of the more fascinating psychological profiles. he's very dangerous. Don't ever underestimate just because he's got sort of an army of Scotch tape and peanut butter. Do not like understate, like his dangerousness as a person or what he might be able to pull off, because he's just absolutely insane. And it comes mostly from the fact that he was raised in an environment of total padded luxury. I refer to him often as an indoor cat. Who was, raised in, big soft pillows and, a glass of milk and wet food every day. I mean, just really pampered, indoor cat. Where his father and his grandfather, who are not what I would again call great men by example, they were men who did things, they accomplished things. And so it was the goal of his father to create a son who would be strong and accomplish things, and gave his teachers and handlers the instruction, make my son strong and a fierce leader and so forth. And you got to understand from the point of view of the people who surrounded him that they had to make a choice, which was either defy the father and do what the son wants for your long-term retirement plan, because eventually the son's going to be in power and have the choice to behead you for giving him or not giving him that thing that he wanted when he was 12, or risk having the father behead you now if he realizes that you're giving your son the softie. So basically, he was never weaned. He's been suckling on a wet nurse his entire life. He's a milk drinker. That is not a metaphor. He's like suckles a wet nurse. He drinks breast milk on a daily basis because he's never been weaned. He is an impotent virgin who can't get an erection in front of a woman. He had his wife killed and her entire band assassinated because he thought that she was going to tell them everything when he found out. And about a year later had her replaced with a body double, and she disappeared out of the public eye. You can look this up. And no one saw her for months and months and months and months and months. And South Korean guy was saying that she had been killed, and then all of a sudden, no, here she is, and she's out in public again. And no, I mean, he had her killed because she knew his little secret and thought that he was going to tell. She probably wasn't going to tell. I mean, she knew better, but he panicked and freaked out. And so essentially his sort of inferiority complex comes from the fact that he's living in the shadow of two people that he considers to be so much bigger and larger than life, and shoes that he could never possibly fill, that he's constantly trying to prove himself in a way to both the people around him and to the sort of non-existent figures of his father and his grandfather, to be this great impactful leader. And as he becomes growingly more insignificant on the global stage, which he does on a daily basis, as the globe becomes more and more interesting and chaotic because of everything else that's going on, he becomes super, super insignificant. There was a time when not much was going on, that North Korea could saber rattle and everyone go, ooh, North Korea. Now there's so much other crap going on that people go North Korea, and you're like, well, who cares? But our concern in looking at his psychological profile is that the more insignificant he feels, which is growing every day, the more likely he is to do something completely and absolutely crazy, what we sort of refer to as a Jim Jones moment or a white heat moment, which if you know the movie White Heat, top of the world, ma, top of the world, like this crazy moment where he'll just let the whole thing burn in order to make a point. And so he is one of the most dangerous figures in the world. If I was really in charge of the world, which I'm not, or I was in charge of the United States military apparatus, which I'm not, and we were talking about removing, rogue state threats because of their danger to the international community, we shouldn't even be bothering in the Middle East right now. We should be in North Korea, dealing with that guy before he just goes off like a powder keg, because the concern is that not that he could do so much damage, but just that because of whatever he could do could destabilize the whole relationship between China, Japan, South Korea, that it could just set off this whole crazy powder keg in Asia that then we'd all have to get involved in and would just, drag us all down. So that's why he's a fascinating, colorful character, because when I call him a milk drinker, that's not a metaphor. He suckles a wet nurse, never been weaned.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because he'll be continually dependent on some woman. He'll never truly be an independent person. I mean, we are counselors. We work with people. My husband has a PhD in psychology or anthropology and psychology. That's part of what we do. And I'm curious about that, Dr. Lessin. What does that mean when someone is continually the entire life attached to a dependency on a breast? And
he's just trying to get abreast of the situation.
Oh, come on. What does that mean psychologically, Sash?
I agree with with what you've said. This guy's nuts and a danger to international stability. And also, he got the nuclear stuff from the Pakistanis. You have to look at the continuing role of the Pakistanis in subverting the United States. That's what I say.
And he can't. He loves and hates women. He has to suckle off a woman's breast his entire life, and yet he can't have an erection and have intercourse. So this is like to me, a very dangerous person. I agree.
Oh yeah, ticking time bomb. Ticking time bomb. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock.
Oh my God. Well, we'll have to stay tuned for that. It's interesting. We have the elections coming up. It'd be great to have a leader or whatever. This whole government that we have is kind of bizarre when you think about it. We spend 2 years electing some kind of president, and they think they know what they're doing for the whole planet. But if you were king of the world or whatever, ruler of the world, and you were to take these dangerous characters that have potential of blowing up the whole planet, destabilizing the whole world, I keep thinking it would be great to put him on some kind of Botany Bay colony on Mars or the moon or something, but that may be too close.
So that's what Corey Green said, that in the meeting with Kissinger, that they basically were saying we want to get off, and we want to take our agents with us, and we don't want to have truth and reconciliation because it won't work. There'll be too many people that want vengeance for their dear ones that have been murdered.
Yeah, and from what I understand, that's kind of the reason why, the negotiating side of who could say yes or no to that is like, nah, we're not going to give you a pass on this one, and we're not going to give you clemency on this one, because you can't just commit atrocities for centuries and or thousands of years and not be culpable for it. So, sorry, you don't get to just say, okay, we're done now, we're sorry, we're going to leave. Can you just give us clemency, please, and we promise we'll go away and not hurt you anymore? That's called not negotiating from a position of strength. And for them to not negotiate from a position of strength means that they're in a vulnerable position, and that we should not even give on that one. And then whatever the solution is going to be, whether we build some kind of, or already have built some kind of very, very, very special prison to put them in, or whether there is a place, an asteroid with a base built inside of it that we can convert into a prison, that we can take them off world and stick them there, that they can't hurt anyone ever again. I don't know. Or I mean, whether it's going to be line them up or string them from the yard arms, or I honestly don't know. It's really going to depend on a lot of things. But I continue to see that there's just not going to be well, I guess you guys get off the hook after all. No, I don't think that's happening. I think that there's because so many people have been affected, and their families, and for generations and so forth. That's exactly the problem. We're not in a very forgiving mood, to go, oh yeah, we're sorry that you raped and murdered us for all that time, and we'll forgive you. No, I think we're kind of holding a grudge, and legitimately so. I don't think that. Some people think that forgiveness is like this ultimate thing, and I don't think so. I think that sometimes people can do things that don't warrant being forgiven for, and you can choose, whether you want to really hold a grudge or not. But I think that there's something to be said for, I'm not going to forgive you until you've paid, until you've been held accountable for what you did. Then I'll think about forgiving you. But until that point, there's no forgiveness for no justice. I totally understand that sentiment. And in some ways, I agree with it. I don't think that we should forgive without justice. I think we should have justice first.
Wow.
On some level, didn't we create this whole scenario in order to have experience?
No. Let me emphasize that strongly. Our planet was invaded by outside invaders who came here to rape and pillage us. We did not invite them in. This was not part of the plan. This was not part of a spiritual plan to learn from ourselves. This was an invading source of power who came into our world, took over, imprisoned us, enslaved us, and we owe them nothing but to fight them, resist them, and destroy them utterly.
Well, see, we don't have that piece of the puzzle that you're sharing right now. Is this like what Errol the Grey at the Roswell, what do you call it, Lawrence Spencer? The nurse at Roswell got the story from Errol the Grey, and Errol the Grey said that this is a prison planet, and even their gray species got trapped in this circle of imprisonment. Is that something that's been going on, or were we free and then they were invaded? I mean, tell us a little bit more, because I'm really trying to understand it. You know,
Sure.
I really want to get.
Sure. My understanding is that the purpose of planet Earth is actually to be a library, and that we're supposed to be this massive, I'm sorry, not supposed to be, we are this massive storehouse of information, and our supposedly job here is to develop our abilities and our connection with our world to be librarians. But because we were invaded and taken over and turned, the school and the library got turned into a prison, that's where we're at with that. And so until we get rid of the people who decided to take our library away from us, it's going to continue to be a prison planet.
Who took our library away from us? What species? Who are we dealing with?
I think it just still comes. I think it still comes down to blaming the Draconians for everything. But I think that you're not talking about just them. I think you're talking about their ability to operate through a number of proxy, and so. There's plenty of blame to go around for those that have participated, but I think that the Draconians still get sort of blame for being the masterminds of it all.
Well, I've heard that the Draconians got taken over by the Archons. And the Archons are interdimensional, and the Draconians are more 3D species. Is that something on the line of what's happening?
I've heard that theorized. I think that we're still analyzing some of the data that's come in to sort of suggest some interesting things like that, and I think that we're exploring some different conclusions at the moment, and we'll see where that comes to. But I think that still the answer is multiple sources of bad beings who have sort of come in and involved themselves in the process, and whether or not the Draconians used the artificial intelligence that took them over, or whether they were taken over by the artificial intelligence to use them, or whether there was some sort of crossing in the middle somewhere, is difficult to say. I mean, unless you were there millions of years ago or whatever, it's difficult to be specific about that sort of thing. But I think we're dealing with we're trying to break it down, but I'm not so sure if that's true or not yet. I'm not going to say that's not true because we haven't fully decoded that, but we're looking at a couple of different other possibilities that we think are more likely, but I don't have enough data on that to share, or confidence to share in that. We haven't gotten to a conclusion yet.
Who's the we that's doing this analysis?
Oh, the intelligence officers at United States Marine Corps Special Section.
Okay. What about Joanne Richards' husband? What's his name? Joanne Richards' husband?
Captain Mark Richards.
Mark Richards. What he was talking about, how are you familiar with Captain Mark Richards and his story about
the rescue at Dulce?
And then he goes into the dynamics of the Earth and the configuration. Are you familiar with his work?
I know of him, certainly. I wouldn't say that I'm familiar with his work. I know that he's, in prison on a trumped-up charge, and there's some people who are trying to get him out, legally, trying to file the proper paperwork and so forth to get him out. And it's all a bullshit, trumped-up charge kind of a thing. And I know that he certainly was in the program, but I'm not familiar with his work, so I couldn't comment on anything that he sort of described or said about the universe.
Right.
What did you and the Marines know about New Schwabenland? And after Byrd was defeated, and the Battle of the Weddell Sea, supposedly there was the realization that there were lots and lots of Germans and Ukrainian girls in the subterranean caverns underneath Antarctica, and I wonder what's happened in Antarctica since, and what you know about it.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
My understanding is that the Neuschwabenlanders, which is what they became known as, they were no longer the Germans or the Nazis, they were the Neuschwabenlanders. Eventually, because we couldn't kick their ass, they were able to negotiate sort of like, hey, we're here, and if there's going to be a United Nations or some kind of a global agreement, you guys got to include us. So sure, we won't fight about it anymore. Sorry about that trying to take over the world thing, but we're here and we're not going away. And then eventually, they got out of Antarctica and moved to the moon because that was a much, it's a better place to be. Sort of Antarctica's cold, not everybody wants to live in the ice for the rest of your life. So, I don't think they're allowed to live sort of in the honeycomb of the earth. I mean, I'm not so sure about that. I don't think the Agarthans want them down there, but I could be mistaken about that. My understanding is they were, kind of escorted out when they sort of went down that far. So, but their ability to sort of live under the ice for so many decades and develop their technology to be a part of the sort of global process. So at some point or another, they became part of the global process, and they're the hidden country, the hidden nation that nobody talks about, because it'd be admitting that we didn't win, World War II, and it wasn't over when we said it was over. Oops, we lied about that. They actually went somewhere else.
Oh, wow. Okay, we just have a little bit more. There's one more thing I want to know. Did you meet any Mayans that were out of space? Some of our informants say that when Thoth educated the Mayans, and we have, things like Lord Pikal in his rocket ship and so forth. What do you know about Mayans in space? Did you run into any or hear of it?
I've never personally ran into them, but I have certainly heard more than one, substantiated statement that the Mayan space program is still an active space program, and members of it do, negotiate and meet with people and are in part of the process, and people do refer to them as the Mayan space program. So they're the modern day persons of that program and the descendants of those persons, from what I understand, but I don't know much more about them than that, other than that they do exist and they're for real. Yeah.
Have you met any extraterrestrial species on a friendly basis, worked alongside them, hung out together? I have a whistleblower friend that she was on a ship outside of Mars, apparently guarding a Stargate or wormhole, and they worked alongside the blue race, and they were humanoid, and they didn't have a pinky. They were lacking a pinky when they came down and some of them were the normal colors of human beings, and when they came down and walked among us, they would put on an artificial pinky. Have you worked alongside, and this was a military action, have you worked alongside any extraterrestrials, and if so, what species?
Sure. When I was on Mars, at some point, there was a negotiating process between us and the insectoid species, and there was about a 9-month exchange program in which every day I would get up in the morning with everybody else, but we would get together with a team of officers and medical personnel, and we would go over to the insectoids hive and hang out there for the day and then come back. So we did that exchange program for about 9 months, and that was side by side with those guys, and that was interesting. That was a very, very interesting experience. And then, sort of not voluntarily, we ended up getting captured by the indigenous reptoids later on, and were held there for 5.5 months and lived with them, and before they sent us back. And that was a very interesting process. Those will probably make interesting chapters in the book if I ever get around to finishing my autobiography.
Oh, how big were they? How big were the reptoids?
What did these two species look like?
Yeah.
Describe them?
The reptoids, varied in height from what I would say, sort of in the 5.5 foot range, 5.5 foot range to, almost as, 7.5 feet tall, big. And the insectoids were pretty much, the same. I'd put them at about the 5'5" range. And, there's some subtle distinction, and I think it was mostly stuff that was not really easy to see. And we had a heads-up display in our helmets, and when I would use the ultraviolet scanner, you could see the patterns on their shells or whatever on their exoskeletons. So I think a lot of their recognition of themselves and patterning is done through ultraviolet patterning on their bodies. The reptoids had a really interesting sort of patterns, as varied as many of the reptiles you see on Earth. So some really, really colorful options, as well as the ability to sort of just, sort of chameleon themselves to sort of rusty brown, anytime that they needed to, because that was, something that was around them. So they did have this kind of chameleon quality too when they were out and about. But their sort of native standing around colors were pretty colorful and pretty interesting. Kind of, I would say that really hanging out, just sitting around the campfire, so to speak, they were quite lovely.
Yeah, that was my experience, and you're the first person I've heard say that. It was, when someone said, what color? Well, they kind of, when they moved, there were different colors that would come forth in there, and they might have like a dominant color of gold or something, or brown or whatever, but then they kind of rainbowed depending on the light and how they were moving. And I think it's part of their ability, like you said, to be a chameleon. That was my experience with the reptilians that I encountered. So are they, do they look like the ones that are on the internet? If you Google reptilian aliens, you get, a dozen or so different types. Do these reptilians that you interact with look like any of the insectoids? I mean, the reptilians, or do the insectoids look like the insectoids on the internet?
I've looked, and I haven't really seen anything that I would say is a match. I would say I've seen things that are like, well, the eyes or the nose look kind of right, but the mouth's wrong, or well, the mouth is right, but the neck is all wrong, or no, I don't remember, the crown of the skull wasn't like that. I mean, so I've seen similarities or things that seem to have some of the components, but I haven't seen anybody do an exact match.
If we had a police artist and you described it, do you think you could convey what they look like to an artist? Maybe. I mean, my photographic memory is pretty good, so I probably could. But yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe. I've never tried, so I just have to say maybe to that. But I could give it a try. I mean, you know what I'm saying. Excellent. We have 1 minute left. How do people reach you?
They can reach me via my. People can reach me via my website, which is earthcitizenconsulting.org. We also have the .com site. My email is on there. It's Captain K-A, spelled out Kaye 444 @gmail.com. People can contact me about any number of things. They can contribute to the cause. They can, I don't have tons of time to answer everybody's questions, but there's a Facebook group that a friend of mine manages, and people discuss and talk stuff there, and there's Q&A stuff going around there. But that's mainly the way people can get in touch with me.
Well, we'd love to support you in your work, and we'd love to have you back again. Thank you so much. We had a great time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Everybody. Thank you for coming.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern in Studio A. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Hi everybody, it's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And It's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, The Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my incredible co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin. And today we've got a really good show. We have Randy-Cramer, also known as Captain K. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Randy before we bring him on. But hold on to your hats. He's just he's incredible. I've been listening to his YouTubes for a couple days here, and he's blowing my mind. Captain Randy-Cramer is an officer who has been given authority. Listen to this. He's been given authority to address the public on behalf of the command staff of the United States Marine Corps Special Section, which was created by President Eisenhower in 1953 as a covert military intelligence branch with special authority over extraterrestrial, multi-dimensional, non-human, and off-world beings, consortiums and collectives, either sanctioned or unsanctioned, within actionable reach of any and all global territory. He is the product of soldier augmentation, a soldier augmentation project called Moon Shadow, a training program for children which he began at age 4, and later spent a 20-year tour of duty off-world, over 17 of which was serving with the Mars Defense Force. He finished his service aboard the EDF SS Nautilus as a pilot under this project called Radiant Guardian, which we're going to have him tell us about. In August of 2013, his superior officers requested he consider going public with their blessing, and he began to share his personal experience with the world in April of 2014. And his website is earthcitizenconsulting.org, and he's got a YouTube channel, and he does public appearances. Let me see what else I have here. Got to scroll down. Okay, then we got a bunch of talking points. I know we're not going to cover it all in one show, and we are going to talk to Randy about having him back. I know we're going to. It's just we're not going to cover it all. Before I bring Randy on, would you, Dr. Lessin, would you like to say something?
Well, this is a chance to get really deep with what's really happening in Mars. I've had extensive in-person interviews with Andy Bashago, and I was able to study his eye movements. And I also interviewed the people that he was on Mars with, and I'm utterly convinced that we've been on Mars and that what you're about to hear about the Mars Defense Force and what's going on.
Program in the UK, so we've been exposed to this personally and as interviewers for the last 10 to 15 years. So we're well aware of this, but let's break this down for our listeners. And just to give you a background on us, Randy, Dr. Lessin and I are Anunnaki researchers, and we're working with other people like the Linkage Institute and other organizations that are trying to figure out which factions are governing and ruling the planet. And so we'd like to get your input on, let's talk about the government for a little bit here. Who is the government? What are the factions? Can you kind of break that down for us from what you understand is going on?
Well, that's in dispute, isn't it? That's sort of the whole problem is that you have a number of factions who are vying for control at every level, at every position, all across the way. And they're all laying a certain claim, legal claim, in different language, different treaties, different, divine right, or we've been here longer and therefore have a right, or we made you and therefore have a right. And there's a lot of different pretexts that they're making for the justification that they have the authority to decide, for everyone else, or to make control the situation somehow, or have legal authority. So that's completely in dispute. That's why we're in the middle of the grand clusterfudge, because there is no clear decider over who's in charge and what they get to decide. And otherwise we would have a singular global government at this time, if that were the case. We would have a singular oligarchical fascist system controlling the entire planet. The fleet, as we understand it, would be completely involved and supportive of that. And that would be done. That would be finished if that were decided. So the fact that we're in a conflict where there's back and forth, there's sides, there's attack, spy, sabotage, and conflict, and back and forth, means that is absolutely in dispute. And it will not be decided until we sort of end up, one side really sort of gets the upper hand over the other.
What's the cast of characters? Who are the different factions? What extraterrestrial and Earth factions are we dealing with? Can you kind of break it down for us, please?
I wouldn't even try. My understanding is that number keeps growing and growing every month now. So that an EBE manual that used to have 50 or 60 species in it, and then, had 80 or 100, now has hundreds in it, and that just number keeps growing. So what exactly the relationship with these beings and what our sort of trade relationships or understanding is, I couldn't tell you. It's a number that is growing so quickly, so fast, that I'm really I'm not even sure how our own people are keeping track of it all, to be honest. My understanding is that information is coming in so quickly, there's no way to even break that down. So, and then a lot of the traditional players aren't who or what they say they are, and a lot of the traditional players aren't necessarily who or what they were 10 or 15 years ago. So I know a lot of people still want to blame the Zeta Greys for everything when they are responsible for nothing these days. We got rid of them. We evicted them from the solar system. They do not exist on planet Earth or within the solar system whatsoever. So anyone who wants to blame them is basically just like, a Puerto Rican did it, blaming a minority or someone that you already want to blame for something in order to waylay actual accountability. But they do not exist in the solar system whatsoever at all anymore. So the landscape is continually changing. There's no way I'd even want to attempt that right now.
Josh, your question.
Well, I'd like to know, quite good's been talking about the blue avians, and they're new on the scene. And who are they? What he said is that they've come to really the entire situation, and they have way higher powers. And I know that you've mentioned them, so I'd like to learn more about them.
I don't know. That sounds like an exaggeration, but we certainly have an experience of them or knowledge of them back in at least to the late 40s and early 50s. They were involved in some of the earliest genetic upgrading, sort of genetic superhuman computer programs. I know at least one person who was a product of that program, and has a extensive sort of experience with them, but is not someone who they like their day job, so they would not want me to speak their name publicly or any such thing.
There is the real thing, so listen up.
And also, I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more from Randy. Randy, welcome to our show. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're really fortunate that you agreed to come on board the show. Okay, so where would you like to begin? I always like to put the ball back in your court. This is a new audience for you. I'm not sure if there's been other people on Revolution Radio who have interviewed you, but it doesn't matter. We have a specific niche. And could you tell us a little bit more about what was going on with your background, so our listeners can better understand what the show's going to be about, especially this Project Moonshadow and how our government recruits children and all that good stuff. Back to you. Go ahead, Randy.
Oh, wow, thanks. Like, just right back to me with that one. Okay, sure, I can do that. Well, I'll start with this, because when you say a sentence like, what the government is doing to children, I have to break that apart into the notion that there is no such thing as the government, excuse me, as some kind of overreaching umbrella of authority that controls everything, because that stopped happening a number of decades ago. And when the special study groups essentially started taking control of all the exopolitical reverse engineering technology programs. Oh, did we lose them?
Yeah, keep going, Randy. We're going to reconnect.
Okay, no worries. When we started essentially got control of the special study group, started getting control of the programs that had anything to do with extraterrestrial technology, what was supposed to be one organizing governing body, which was the MJ-12 committee, instead of them being solely responsible and accountable and in authority over all of that information, many factions within the special study group started breaking apart and working for themselves. So for decades, there's been no such thing as the government. What we have are parts of the government. What we have are legal, operating, regulated arms of the government, and what we also have are rogue elements of the government who essentially, because when you want to track their paperwork that they sort of use to justify themselves, a lot of it is based on illegality and breaking the law and violating the Constitution in order to justify their existence. So in that sense, they have justified themselves through illegality and therefore are illegal rogue programs. So you have this real problem of what I sort of called my grand cluster fudge theory, because it's a cluster fudge of dozens of different military intelligence organizations just in this country who have been competing for control over the entire mess for decades. So they have this loose agreement, very loose agreement based on some treaties on who cooperates on what they cooperate on and what they don't. And so there's a lot of wiggle room for them to spy on each other, sabotage one another, steal things, technology from one another, and sabotage, each other's agendas. So it's super complicated. Let's just start there. So to answer that question even a little more, Phil, I'll say there's a number of different programs that are doing some pretty terrible things. And there are a number of different programs who try and do less terrible things. And there's so many dozens of programs in this country and other countries to sort of train children that all I can really say is that fundamentally we understand you got to start young if you want to really develop and program like a super soldier or a super psionic individual. So you got to start when they're young. You can't wait until they're 17 for them to enlist. You have to start when they're really tiny. So I'm not agreeing with that. I'm just saying that's something we learn as a fact. Like biologically, you want to hit that development stage in order to get those super abilities to happen.
Okay, so we're going to break that down even further. Okay, Sasha has his question first.
What's psionic?
And that's the whole thing that, before you go to psionic, okay, that's part two. Part one was the real government of the planet. So, and we have interviewed other people. We actually had a fellow that was signed a contract when he was 3 years old.
Would not come out and talk publicly of their story, but we have records of them going way back. So and what we understand is they're mostly been technical medical sort of assistants in biological genetic engineering programs. That's about all I really know from our record keeping system of them. And most of what I'm hearing about them is sort of brand new information as far as what Corey Good is talking about. And again, I think a lot of species, no matter who they are and what side they are, like to overinflate their abilities or their function. And so anyone who comes along and says, we're the most powerful on the scene now, you better respect us. Like, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But that's usually, like what people say when they come on the scene. They try and command authority. And I don't know, believe it when I see it. But I think that they're helping at the moment. At the moment, that's what I understand to be the case.
So what's your understanding of the Anunnaki and their role in our history and current affairs?
That's an interesting question, and it certainly depends on how you define them. Some people want to define them as sort of being, this one type of Sumerian, lineage or DNA, when the Sumerian royalty lineage may in fact be more than one extraterrestrial species. So I want to say that, people need to be much more clear sometimes about identifying exactly who and what they're talking about. But, my understanding is they certainly are one of the larger stake claimers, saying that they have one of the larger stakes and one of the longest historical legal claims on the situation. But again, I think that's yet to be decided and worked out. Do we lose them again? Looks like we did.
Okay, Randy, we're gonna connect back with them. If you could just out right now at this.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear any of that.
Is there anything that you find
Hi, we're back. Sorry, we keep getting bumped, so we're going to try our home phone. We're having a storm here in the jungle, so that's probably what's happening. Is also we're talking about this show, so who knows? The powers that be don't want us to hear what's going on. I'm sorry, we missed the last about 5 minutes of what we were saying, so I don't know. I guess we just go to the next.
Aloha, you have reached 80824.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, is this Janet?
Yes, hi. Sorry, we keep getting bumped for some reason. I don't know what's going on. Do you want to try Skype? John?
Yeah, sure. We can switch over to Skype.
Okay, let's try. We can try, or just do this if you can tie us in. Either way.
Did you want to try the phone line until it eventually?
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear. We can't hear the show right now or anything going on. I don't know if we're on or we're just talking to you.
No, we're on live right now. We still have Randy with us.
Okay, so Randy, go ahead and when we're back, know what's going on. So I'm not sure where we left off. Let's go back to talking about how they recruited you into Project Moon Shadow. We're dealing with children. I mean, what did they do? They come knocking on your door and say to you, like on Ender's Game, we want your kid? Or did they sneak in and grab you in the night? How did you get involved with this at 4 years of age?
Well, that's the beginning of a training period. It was actually before that. So they pretty much pick families for their genetics, and they pretty much, experiment and try and sort out the kids and see what they can, genetically engineer to create little super children. So I actually was not recruited so much as designed on a drafting table and genetically engineered in a petri dish before I was even implanted into my mother's womb and born. So yeah, it's a little even weirder that I'm actually genetically engineered from the ground up.
From the ground up. Are you 100% human, or do you have alien DNA within your genetic structure?
Well, we all have extraterrestrial DNA in our genetic structure, so I just certainly have maybe some different specific ones than you or someone else does, but we all do. So I don't even, I'm not sure. I don't know specifically for sure. So, but there's definitely an interesting mix of whatever they put inside of me.
So what are your special abilities? You're like a superhero. What's your special abilities as a genetic? You're human.
Mostly, I'm just supposed to be, generally smarter, faster, stronger, and have better endurance than, everybody else. I suppose I'm a pretty darn good tactical thinker, and the genetic training and the implants and all that other stuff does sort of stack onto some sort of interesting, augmented abilities that are situation responsive. So the switches don't really turn on, unless the threat level increases. So I'll sort of move faster and be stronger depending on how many attackers and how big their guns are.
So when were you born?
1970.
1970, and that was the first time you came in, or I thought I heard something about you were reset. You went through some years and then reset, or was that somebody else?
Well, I mean, the tour of duty is a 20-year tour, but then at the end of the tour, they bring you back to the time that they took you away and, do this sort of age reversing or whatever and put you into a younger body or whatever it is, and then set you to do your life all over again. So you kind of go live 20 years and then come back and do it over down here.
Right, and Al Bielek had a similar thing happen to him, although it might be. So how long have they known how to do this? And who is this? What section of the government is doing this? Who is it? I call it the government, but who are the people that are doing this program with these children? These children.
Well, pretty much any and all of the military intelligence agencies that have super soldier and super spy, psionic spy programs have used children. So whatever their particular and specific method for that program is to identify and acquire them is what they use. And then they train them at a very young age and then deploy them when they're still fairly young, usually 16 or 17 years old. 20-year tour is about standard, and then they do a so-called mind wipe, which it's not a mind wipe so much as a mind repress, and then you kind of forget things, except you're still really emotionally attached to the trauma, and you have to sort of dig through and remember everything, which is kind of a natural process too. So you can't make people forget their memories forever. Like eventually the memories will want to come back. That's kind of how the human mind works. It doesn't want to stay in a state of forgetfulness like that. So it's a ticking clock when you erase again, air quotes, somebody's memories, that they're going to get them back at some point.
Well, Sasha, question.
Well, my questions have been about, I'm really interested in Mars and the history of U.S. Defense Forces on Mars and in the near solar system, and who have you fought and who have you defended and stuff like that.
Yeah, if you could. I know you don't like to talk a lot about the wars, but maybe just a summary for our audience would be great.
Yeah, sure. No, the Mars Defense Force has probably been active since the mid-1970s or something like that. The first colonies were probably established in the early to mid-1970s, and the Mars Defense Force would have been contracted